Hey, so this class we're going to go over how to perform long division with polynomials. Basically, what polynomials are kind of like algebraic expressions with not just numbers. So you have x's and potentially other variables, but those are more complicated. But yeah, so as a starter for the first example, instead of jumping straight into it, let's do a comparison first. So if we had a numeric long division question, this is pretty simple. You would first set it up as 78 divided by 2. This is the format of long division. And then you would ask yourself, how many times does 2 go into 7? Your answer should be 3. So 2 times 3 equals 6. And then subtract. 7 minus 6 is 1. And then bring the 8 down. And then how many times does 2 go into 18? Your answer should be 9. So 9 on top. And then 2 times 9 is 18. Subtract again, you get a 0, which is the remainder. And so from what we just did, we know that the answer to 78 divided by 2 is 39. Basically the quotient that we got on top. For polynomial division, it is basically the exact same thing. So first, let's set it up like we did with the numerical question. So x squared plus 5x plus 6 divided by x plus 2. All I did, once again, was just set it up, putting the divisor outside and the dividend inside the sign of division. But yeah, so from here, let's once again do the exact same thing. So we are going to ask ourselves, how many times does x plus 2 go into x squared? So you might ask yourself, okay, this is pretty difficult, but when you are doing long division, we don't necessarily care about the 2 for now. So we're just going to look at the x. We're going to ask ourselves, how many times does x go into x squared? Your answer should be x, because x times x is x squared. I'm actually going to write it here. We have x times x is x squared. So we're actually going to write x on top, because this is our first multiplication. But now let's stop ignoring the 2. Let's bring it back into our conversation. So x times the entire thing, which is x plus 2, should give us x squared plus 2x. So let me just recap what I did. First, I looked at the x. I'm going to do some yellow. I looked at the x. I tried to get to x squared. And by doing that, I should multiply by x. And then after that, multiply the entire thing over here by x. And stop ignoring the 2 at this point. So x times x is x squared. And then x times 2 is 2x. And that's how we got this. And now, just like the numerical long division question, we always subtract after multiplying. So let's subtract the entire thing. And also, a very common mistake is that people will subtract this, but will forget to subtract this. So that's a very common mistake, so just be careful of that. But yeah, so what we should do is subtract the entire thing in the form of a bracket. But yeah, so x squared minus x squared is 0. 5x minus 2x is 3x. And then we can add a plus sign here, but it's the exact same thing as 3x. So let's just erase the 0 plus, because we don't want any extra confusion. But yeah, and just like we did it here in the numerical question, we brought the 8 down. So let's bring the next term down, the 6, so plus 6. All I'm doing is basically the exact same steps like the numerical question, but we're actually going to see what the answer is going to look like here. But yeah, so now we should ask ourselves again, how many times does x plus 2 go into 3x plus 6? Once again, let's just ignore the 2 for now. So ignore this 2 and ignore the 6. We want to always look at the highest power of x. So ignore the 2 and ignore the 6. Look at the x and the 3x. So how do you get from x to 3x? You multiply by 3. X times 3 is 3x. So we're going to write plus 3 on top. But yeah, so now we added 3. Let's multiply this with the entire thing here, which is x plus 2. So first we're going to do 3 times x, which is 3x, and then 3 times 2, which is 6. And then let's subtract the entire thing. Once again, be careful of the brackets that I am writing here. But yeah, so subtract the entire thing, put a negative sign or subtraction sign, and now 3x minus 3x is 0, and 6 plus 6 is also 0. So we have a remainder of 0, and in other words, we are done. But yeah, so now we know that the answer of the question, I'm going to write it down again. So x squared plus 5x plus 6 divided by x plus 2 is equal to x plus 3. Once again, just look at the answer that is up here. This is the quotient, it is the answer. And since we have a remainder of 0, we do not care about this now, but we will go over examples that actually do have remainders. So we're going to cover what that would look like. But yeah, so once again, after dividing, your answer should be up here. And the answer is x plus 3 to this division question. But yeah, let's move on to the next example. Okay, for question number 2, this is very similar to the first question, except that we have different numbers. So first, let's set it up. We would have x squared minus 9x plus 8, all divided by x minus 1. So first, let's look at the highest power again, and we're going to ignore the 1 for now, but we're going to only look at the highest powers. So how do you get from x to x squared? X times something equals x squared, and that something is x. So x times x, and we're going to write that something on top, by the way, but x times x is x squared. And now we take this x and multiply it by every term in the divisor, including the negative 1 that we ignored first. So x times x is x squared, and then x times negative 1 is negative x. Now we subtract all of this using a bracket. The bracket is very important once again because if you don't include it, you're going to have a weird answer, and if you only subtract this first term, you're going to have a wrong answer. But now, so let's subtract this. X squared minus x squared is 0. Negative 9x minus negative x, I'm going to write it on the side. Negative 9x minus negative x. This is equal to negative 9x plus x, which is just equal to negative 8x. So minus 8x over here. And then after that, since we have a term on top, bring that down. After we subtract at all times, we bring the next term down to the bottom and subtract it and divide it the next time. So now we look at the highest powers again. This is still x over here, but this time the highest power is negative 8x because this doesn't even have an x. So we take negative 8x as our highest power. We ask ourselves, how do you get from x to negative 8x? So x times something is equal to negative 8x, and that something is negative 8. So let's write negative 8 on top, minus 8. And now it's pretty simple again. Multiply that negative 8 by every term in the divisor. So negative 8 times x is negative 8x. Then negative 8 times negative 1 is positive 8. Now let's subtract all this. Negative 8x minus negative 8x is 0. And then 8 minus 8 is also 0. So we have a remainder of 0 for this question. And now we basically found our answer, and we found everything that we need, but let's write it in a more formal way. So the question was x squared minus 9x plus 8, all divided by x minus 1, and this is equal to x minus 8 because that was the quotient that was over here. Once again, we did not have a remainder for this question, so you don't have to worry about that. But in the next questions, we're going to see examples of that, and we're going to see how we handle that and where we put it. But yeah, so we don't have a remainder. All we have to do now is put the x minus 8 down, and this is our final answer, and we are done. Okay, for the third question, it says x squared plus 19x minus 12 divided by x plus 2. So once again, let's set that up. X squared plus 19x minus 12, all divided by x plus 2. Let's bring all this down just so that we have space to write the answer on top. But yeah, so after this, let's first look at the highest powers again. So over here, the highest power is x, and over here, the highest power is x squared. So how do you get from x to x squared? It's the exact same thing as any of the other questions we did, but x times x is equal to x squared. So we're going to write x on top. And now let's multiply with what we have. So let's expand this x to the x and to the 2. X times x first is equal to x squared. And then x times 2 is plus 2x. After that, let's subtract all of it, including brackets. Once again, this is a very important point. But yeah, if you've noticed, so far, all the things we've been getting here is 0. And you kind of should be getting this. The first term is what we're trying to eliminate. That's why we multiply by x, so that we replicate it here, and then when we subtract, it goes away. So you should always be getting 0 for your first subtraction. If you get anything else, that means you probably made a mistake. So yeah, x minus x squared is 0, because that's what we were aiming for. And then this is not always a 0. It could be, but it's not always a 0. So 19x minus 2x is 17x. So we're done the first step. Let's do this again after we bring this term down, because after each subtraction, we always bring the next term down and continue the loop again. So yeah, in this case, So how do you get from x to 17x? You multiply by 17. So let's write that on top. So plus 17. And yeah, in this case, let's expand the 17 onto both of these terms again. So 17 times x is 17x, and then 17 times 2 is 34. And now let's subtract the entire thing once again. So this should be a 0. Again, I'm going to do this in pink, but 17x minus 17x is 0. Once again, this is what we should get. If you do not get 0 for your first term, you definitely did something wrong. But yeah, so 17x minus 17x is 0. Negative 12 minus 34, I'm going to write it here. So negative 12 minus 34, we are going to get negative 46. But yeah, so I'm going to write negative 46 over here. And we're basically done because we don't have any more numbers on top or terms to bring down. So we have to stop. And now, if we write our answer down, so x squared plus 19x minus 12, all divided by x plus 2, you probably already guessed this, is equal to, first we write down the quotient, so we got x plus 17, let's write that down, x plus 17, and since we have a remainder, we're still going to write that down, so minus, because the remainder is negative, minus 46 over x plus 2, because that was what we were dividing by to begin with. X plus 2 is what we're dividing by, so that's going to be the denominator, and the remainder is going to be the numerator. But yeah, and once again, you might have missed this of how I got the negative, but we usually always add. So imagine adding plus negative 46 over x plus 2. That negative just pops out, and we have this, x plus 17 minus 46 over x plus 2. And we are done. This is our final answer, and we can move on to the next question. Okay, question number 4. So this time we have a fraction, if you have noticed. This is the exact same as division because fractions are division expressions, so we can write it the same way. This entire thing is going to be equal to x squared minus 13, all divided by x minus 4. Once again, fractions are divisions, so that's why we did that. And yeah, so from here, let's look at the highest powers again, x and x squared. How do you get from x to x squared? Multiply by x. X times x is x squared, and then x times negative 4 is negative 4x. But hold on, let's look at this answer and notice what we did. In this case, if we try to subtract, we're going to get 0 from this, which we want. But then what are we going to subtract 4x from? So we actually made a mistake in the original setup because you always have to look at the powers and fill in the empty spots with zeros. So I'm going to actually backtrack a bit. So instead of having this as our setup, let's erase the negative 13. But yeah, let's notice that in our original question, we had no term for x. So we can write down plus 0x because we did not have an x. We had x squared, and then we jumped on straight to the constant. But we skipped over the x. So let's write that here, plus 0x, and then let's write down the negative 13. So minus 13. And let's just expand this to cover everything. But yeah, so now we can actually do the division because we have all the x terms that we need. X to the power of 2, x to the power of 1, and x to the power of 0, which is invisible because we don't write it down. But yeah, so after that, now we can actually divide, but it's almost the exact same thing. So how you get from x to x squared, you multiply by x, so x, and then x times x is x squared, x times negative 4 is minus 4x, and now if you notice, we have an x term to subtract this from. But yeah, so let's subtract the entire thing. X squared minus x squared is 0, which we expect. Once again, this term should always cancel out to 0 because that's what we want. I'm going to erase it, okay, and then I'm going to erase these arrows. And then after that, 0 minus negative x, so 0 minus negative 4x, not x, 4x. This is the exact same as 0 plus 4x, which is just 4x. And yeah, so I'm going to write plus 4x down here. And since we are done subtraction, let's bring down any terms we have remaining. So negative 13, let's bring that down. So minus 13. And then after that, we have one more step to go. How do we get from x to 4x? You multiply by 4. So plus 4. So now 4 times x is 4x. And then 4 times negative 4 is negative 16. and let's subtract this entire thing once again. And do not forget the brackets. This is super important. I keep stressing this, but do not forget these brackets. But yeah, after that, 4x minus 4x is 0, just like we expect. Negative 13 minus negative 16 is going to be equal to 3. So negative 13 minus negative 16 is the exact same as negative 13 plus 16, which is 3. So, and this is positive, so I'm going to write a plus here, even though it doesn't matter because 0 is nothing. But yeah, so after that, we are done because we have no more terms to bring down. We stop here. And then if I look back at my original question, we had x squared minus 13 over x minus 4. And this was equal to, first the quotient. Quotient here is x plus 4. So let's write that down. X plus 4. And the remainder this time is 3. So I'm going to write plus 3 over x minus 4, because that was what we were dividing by in the original question again. So if you notice this is getting a bit repetitive, but it's the exact same steps every time. But in this question, what we added was we had to look for the 0x, because you always have to decrease the terms by decreasing the exponent of x by 1. You can't just skip 0x. That would mess up other questions. But yeah, let's move on to the next question and see what we have. So, question number 5, this is a fraction once again. So we're going to do what we did in the previous question. Let's set it up as a division, because fractions are divisions. So x cubed minus x squared minus 10x plus 12, all divided by x minus 3. So let's look at the highest powers again. Here we have x, which is going to always be the highest power, because this part does not change. And then here we have x cubed. So how do you get from x to x cubed? You multiply by something to get x cubed, and that something is x squared. So x times x squared is x cubed, and now let's multiply that x squared by every term over here. So first, x squared times x is x cubed, and then x squared minus times minus 3, or negative 3, should be negative 3x squared. Now let's subtract the entire thing over here. So first we get x cubed minus x cubed. This goes away to 0. So we're going to write it down, but you don't even have to write it down, to be honest. So there's a 0. And then negative x squared minus negative 3x squared should be plus 2x squared. But I'm going to do it on the side. So negative x squared minus negative 3x squared. This is negative x squared plus 3x squared, which is equal to 2x squared. The thing is here was the double sign, so always be careful of that, because a very common mistake is to ignore one of these and assume it is subtraction of a positive number, which is wrong. But yeah, so now we are done the subtraction, so our next step is to always bring the next term down. So let's bring the negative 10x down, and do not forget to include the negative sign, because that is very important as well. So include the negative sign to get negative 10x. From here it should be pretty simple. How many times does x go into 2x squared? Because once again, that is the highest power of x so far. So you multiply by 2x. I'm going to write it on the side, but x times 2x is equal to 2x squared. So positive 2x on top. And then 2x times x is equal to 2x squared. 2x times negative 3 is negative 6x. And now let's subtract like we always do. So subtract all this in a form of bracket. So 2x squared minus 2x squared is 0. 10 or negative 10x minus negative 6x should be negative 4x. I'm going to do it over here as well, but negative 10x minus negative 6x is the same as negative 10x plus 6x, which is equal to negative 4x. And now from here, we have one more term on top, so let's bring that down once again. So plus 12. From here, let's focus on the highest power again, which is x. And then, so how do you get from x to negative 4x, including the negative? Do not ignore that. So you multiply by negative 4. I'm going to do it on the bottom again, but x, I'm going to do it in a different color. X times negative 4 is equal to negative 4x. So we're going to put negative 4 on top with the sign. Once again, include all negatives. And then negative 4 times x is negative 4x. Negative 4 times negative 3 is positive 12. Let's subtract all of this again in a bracket. Do not forget the bracket, because that is very important. And now negative 4x minus 4x is 0. 12 minus 12 is also 0. So we have a remainder of 0 this time, and we are done. But yeah, so since we are done, let's now write the answer in a formal way. So our question was x cubed minus x squared minus 10x plus 12 over x minus 3 is equal to, now let's put the quotient, because since we don't have a remainder, we don't have to worry about that, but we have a quotient, so let's bring that down. X squared plus 2x minus 4. And we are done, since we combined everything we found into one final answer, and we equated it to the question. But yeah, these are equal, and we are done the question. Okay, so for the final question, this time we have something very, very similar. Let's write this down again. But yeah, so as a setup, x cubed minus 5x squared plus 13x minus 12 divided by x minus 2. So as a starter again, let's look at the highest power of x. So we have x and x cubed. How do you get from x to x cubed? You multiply by x squared. So x squared on top. And then x squared times x is x cubed. X squared times negative 2 is minus 2x squared. So from here, let's actually subtract, but before that, add the brackets. So x cubed minus x cubed is 0. Negative 5x squared minus negative 2x squared should give us negative 3x squared. I'm going to do it on the side. But yeah, negative 5x squared minus negative 2x squared is the exact same as negative 5x squared plus 2x squared, which is negative 3x squared. So that's why we have the negative here as well. And do not forget the sign, because that's also very important. If you miss it, you're going to mess up the entire question. But yeah, next up, we can bring the next term down. So plus 13x. From here, let's do the exact same thing again. So how do you get from x to negative 3x this time? Once again, you have to include the sign, but negative 3x. So to get to that, x times negative 3x is equal to negative 3x squared. Usually these are easy to find the answer for, but if they're easy, people tend to do more mistakes. So you have to focus on actually getting the right answer and not speeding through it and making a lot of mistakes. But yeah, so from here, let's write negative 3x on top, because that was our answer. So negative 3x, and then negative 3x times x is negative 3x squared. And then negative 3x times negative 2 is positive 6x. I'm going to write it on the side again, but negative 3x times negative 2 is equal to 6x, because two negatives make a positive. And we're done with that. So let's subtract again using brackets. Negative 3x squared minus negative 3x squared is 0, so 0. And then 13x minus 6x is 7x, so plus 7x. And we're done with that. One last step, let's bring the last term down. So minus 12. From here, let's do the exact same thing. So how do you get from x to 7x? You multiply by 7. So plus 7. And then 7 times x is 7x. 7 times negative 2 is negative 14. And from here, let's actually start subtracting. So this would become 7x minus 7x is 0. Negative 12 minus negative 14 is 2, because I'm going to write it here on the side. Negative 12 minus negative 14 is equal to negative 12 plus 14, which is equal to 2. And we're done with that. So we have no more terms to bring down, so we can stop now. But yeah, so our answer is, for this question, x cubed minus 5x squared plus 13x minus 12 over x minus 2 is equal to, let's put the quotient down. So this will give us x squared minus 3x plus 7. I'm going to write it nicer, minus 3x plus 7. And then plus the remainder over what we were dividing by, x minus 2, not plus 2. And then we are done, and we can stop once again. So this is kind of how you solve any long division problem with any polynomial. It's pretty easy and repetitive, but just watch out for mistakes, because they are easy to make. And that's it.